Hey folks, welcome to session number 4 of the Foundry Generative AI Conversations. I'm Rob Folkrod, a lead technical trainer inside of Microsoft, and we are really looking right now at how to make our applications more than just chat. In our earlier conversation, we talked about making a chat application, but you will often need to do more than just have conversation back and forth. This topic here, we're looking at the usage of tools from within our agent, primarily in this case from the perspective of needing to add grounding or data. So you can kind of think of this as kind of part 1 in our tools conversation. Let's talk about tools, because we're going to use that term in a couple different ways here inside of Foundry. But when we think about large language models, we know that there has been, at some point in time, a massive amount of time and energy put into training these models. But then once they were trained, they're pretty fixed. They generally don't learn anything new as long as that model is in existence. They were trained on a large amount of public information, but they don't necessarily know your information. They don't know what happened yesterday, and they certainly can't unto themselves take any action. And tools are one way of being able to extend the capabilities of this, what feels like a giant brain inside of a chat, inside of a large language model. So we can see here that when we start extending a large language model with tools, it can potentially, depending upon the tool, give access to real-time information, right? The things that have just happened since the training of that model, or maybe yesterday, right? We will have the ability to take actions instead of just, hey, how do I fill out this time off request? Will you fill out the time off request for me? Make sure that when it's responding, it's not responding based upon kind of general knowledge about how the world works, but instead the large language model is responding based upon how your enterprise works. The ability to extend functionalities and actions beyond just chat, and potentially even to start building workflows that instead of just a one and done conversation, that there could be decision structures in place. Now, when you're using Foundry, you can bring your own tools. You can bring your own capabilities into these chat conversations, into these agentic conversations. However, one of the things that we have with Foundry is that while you can build your own custom tools, there are a number of tools that are already built in that we might refer to as these common tools. We will see in the various slides coming up a deeper dive into each one of these, but let's just get an idea starting off. So the first one here, the code interpreter. Large language models are really good at kind of predicting what the next token is going to be in a conversation. The cat fell off the roof, cat fell off the counter, right? Predicting what that next token is. That's an awful way to do data analysis, mathematical operations. Those can't be done by just kind of guessing what the next token is supposed to be on a predictive, somewhat random nature. But what they are very good at is they're very good at writing code. Code can be written very much in that next, predict the next token. So code interpreter tools allow large language models to leverage that massive ability, but then to also just execute that code so that we can kind of mix together the non-deterministic nature of large language models with the highly deterministic language or the highly deterministic process of executing code. It kind of gives us a best of both worlds. Continuing, if we want to know what happened in the world yesterday, it's not in your model. As a matter of fact, when we start looking at other knowledge sources, it's probably something that happened yesterday or the day before yesterday, may not even be in your own knowledge sources. So often to get the most current information, we just need to search the internet. And the web search tool gives you a very quick, click it in, turn it on, and now you've shared that capability with the large language model. Now, what you may have in your realm is you may have documentation that accurately describes what your enterprise looks like, whether these be policy files, whether these be job descriptions. Those files can be used as a knowledge source simply by uploading them into the large language model. But when you can't reuse the one that's already there, you may just want to write your own code. And in those scenarios, you'll write your code in your client, and then with a decorator, with a description, you'll tell the large language model, hey, listen, if you need to call this tool, let me know. Give me the data. I'll call it on your behalf. This really opens up the doors to large language models being able to perform really any action at all, simply by calling into a function that you've described. It's really extending the power of large language models in your applications. Let's take a look at how these work from a code perspective. So the code interpreter tool, if you are in the portal, if you're in the Foundry portal, it's a relatively straightforward process to go into the portal, look in that tool section, and add code interpreter. Right. From a code perspective, this is similar code to what we have seen in the past, where we had our client.responses.create. So we're using the responses API, pick whatever the particular model is, and instructions, but then there's going to be a tools collection. This is an array that we can pass in. And the type of tool, there's known values that we can use to trigger some of these from our code. And so when we say type code underscore interpreter, you'll keep that all lowercase, then it'll create a code interpreter for you behind the scenes. There is this idea of a container, so you can upload files in there so that it has some prefabricated files or data files that are necessary. But really just a one-liner, and you can get that code interpretation concept. Using the web search tool, I don't want to point out the whole thing again and again, but if we look, you'll see again we're using the create, model, instructions. We're adding in our tools. Here again, type with the well-known value of web search or web search preview, depending upon which version that you're grabbing. So another tool that you're very likely to use is the file search tool. In this scenario, you've got your own files, and you just want to get them into the large language model's realm relatively quickly. So to do that, we're going to need a few additional steps that we didn't really see with the earlier two tools. The first thing that we're going to need is to create a vector store. A vector store is boiling your data down into numerical representations. Large arrays of data. These arrays here could be compared one to the next, and arrays that are relatively close to one another have semantic meaning that is very similar, and arrays that are further apart have meanings that are very, very different. The process is usually a little bit cumbersome to kind of build those vector stores. This particular API does make it relatively easy for us. So we first start off by building a vector store, then we add the documents in there. Once we've uploaded those documents beneath the covers, there's a process that's automatically indexing and breaking that down into pieces, what we call chunking that data, and then turning that data into those numerical equivalents, which is called embedding. Then at the query time, when we go to give a particular prompt, it looks at our prompt and does that kind of same process. It says, let's get some numerical representations and find the things that are numerically close. Those are the documents that are retrieved. Once we have those documents or those portions of those documents, they are fed into the large language model with the rest of our prompt, and data is pulled, or results are pulled from there. So let's take a look at what that looks like in terms of code. So the OpenAI SDK has in it a vectors store collection to which we can then call out create. So first get a store, get a reference to a particular store, building it on the fly. Once we have a reference to that particular store, okay, you'll get that vector store, we're going to get an ID in there. Once we've got that ID, we can then upload one or more documents into that store. And at that point in time, that's when the files are going to be chunked and embedded and then used later on. So 2 steps, build the store, upload the documents. Lastly, when we're looking at our create call, we're going to go into the tools themselves and say, hey, I need to use the file search tool and specify one or more vector IDs. So you can see in this case there is an array of them, so we may have several ID stores, some vector stores behind the scenes, but in this case we're just passing in the one vector store. Okay. And then in here we'll also say include the search call results. So once that information is going in, that will also be included in the response going up. The response output, very much the same as what we've seen up to this point. And then lastly, for this collection, is the function tool. So the function tool, again, says it's not already there. What I need doesn't already exist. This is often used when what we want is for the large language model to be able to interact with the application that it's being called from. From a function perspective, you don't have to do a whole heck of a lot different. So you'll see in this example here, we have a function. The function is defined here as getTime. Those of you with a Python background will look at that particular function, and it is as close to a hello world as we really are going to get in a sample like this. Then we say we've got a function tool. Function tool is then going to have the name of the function itself. Now here, this isn't a direct reference to the function. We're just saying, listen, there's going to be a function, it's named getTime. And then give it a decent description. The large language model is going to need to know what the function does, and then be able to make, in essence, decisions on whether we should call that function or not. So the description, along with the name, are going to help it make that decision. Then we do our create, the call into our responses model. Again, with the model in there, your input message, we are then including the tools section that we created earlier. But at this point, there's going to be a little bit of a conversation because the large language model doesn't have direct access to our function. So instead, it'll have a response that says, you know, that function seems like something I'm going to need to know. So when we're looking at the response output, we're going to look at the type and see, well, is the response output a function call? Where the large language model says, I need you to do that thing for me. In this case, if there is a function call, and we only passed in one function, the getTime function, we'll usually have some sort of dispatch component that looks to see if it is a function call, then which of those functions needs to be invoked. And in this case, we're just doing them both in the same line because there's only the one. So if we are invoking that, then we will call on the behalf of the large language model, we will call the getTime function for them. In here, later on, we'll get into more complicated versions where there's a parameter collection that needs to be passed in. Right now, it didn't take any parameters. It's kind of nice to fit onto a PowerPoint deck. But we will then append the output to that function call. We will do another response saying, basically, here's your response. You asked for this call. And then we can go ahead and output the text. In this scenario here, we know for a fact that we're not going to get another function call. We're pretty sure we're not going to get another function call. Usually you'll see some sort of looping process that's going to be going through and getting that. So what's coming up is an opportunity to get it a little hands-on. In here, we will start by setting up a couple tools inside the playground, but then we will quickly move over into an application, and we'll call the tools from there. We're going to start by looking at Foundry and the playground. So up to this point, we have already seen how to set up a project and deploy a model. I'm going to assume you've done that already. If not, see some of the earlier recordings where we have done just that. So we're going to swing right over into Build and into the Models section, and we will play around with one of our already deployed models, here specifically the GPT 4.1 model that we've been playing around with. And in here, we're just going to start without any tools at all. So we're going to say, hey, you are a travel assistant that provides information on travel services from our favorite Margie's Travel. And without using any tools at all, we're going to just ask a question here. What are some recommended tourist activities in New York next month? And what we're going to get from this is just using the model's information, right? When it was trained on this information a year or so ago, there were things that it could guess. So we have some generic ideas here. There are going to be some Broadway shows going on. Pretty safe bet. Central Park is still going to be there. Yep, probably right. So, but we don't have any dates and times. We don't have anything that is relatively concrete. So what we can do in here is we can swing into this idea here of tools. And while there's a ton that we can add, we're going to just add right now the web search capability. So with just a quick little click, we now have kind of a generic search capability brought in. We will ask, again, we'll take a new chat here so as not to have that already in. What are some recommended tourist activities in New York next month? And now we should get something a little bit more specific than what we saw initially. Okay. So what you're probably seeing is some things that have kind of been blurred out a little bit in terms of, dates and times and email addresses, right? We shouldn't be publicizing too much, but we are getting some very concrete ideas that are happening inside of New York at this point. So nice start, real easy to be able to go ahead and add web search as a simple tool in Foundry. Now we do need to take a look at, well, what does that mean from a coding perspective? So the first thing that we are going to need is we're going to swing back home and we're going to make sure that we have the appropriate endpoint. So I'm going to grab that and throw that onto my clipboard. We will have that up and ready to go. And then we will go into a starter code base. Now already I have cloned the repository locally. Already I have set up the environment. Again, in the last exercise, we went through the process there, so that's already been recorded once. I don't want to have to show you that same thing again and again for the next 20 some odd demonstrations. So here we have already cloned that. We've already brought it down. I'm going into the environment variable here. I am dropping in the environment variable our endpoint and our model. Those are already in place. And I have already done a couple of the things that were exactly the same in the earlier exercise. We've already imported the same namespaces, specifically here, just the OpenAI namespace, right? And the OpenAI object. And as we have in the past, we have established how we are authenticating default Azure credential again, and creating an instance of the OpenAI client by passing in the endpoint and passing in our authentication. So that is exactly the same as what we have seen up to this point. But now we have a little bit of data that we want to bring in, right? We have some brochures that could be that are Margie's travel. So in there specifically, Dubai, Vegas, London, looking at the company information as a whole, and New York. And what we would love is for our client app here to have specific details about the things that we, our organization, would suggest, not just doing a generic web search. So for that, we're going to need a place to put these documents so that they can be read by the model. So we're going to first want a vector store to put that together. So we're going to grab a little bit of code right here, drop that into place, tab it up, and let's take a look at what we're doing in here. So for starters, inside of the client, there is a vectors store object with a create method. We are simply giving it a name. There are other attributes, other arguments that could be passed in, how we need to chunk that and break that up, and et cetera and so forth. But here, we're just going to give it the name of the vector store, travel brochures. These guys. Then, pretty straightforward, Python at this point, go into brochures PDF, make sure that we found something, make sure that we've got those unzipped and ready to go, and then go ahead and in this case, go to vector stores, file batches, and upload and poll. So we are taking the vector store ID that we created here, passing that in, and the file streams, and uploading those. So now there's a place the LLM can get its hands on this information. As we did earlier, we are using the responses API, so we're going to track our last response. And then we're going to, very similar to what we saw earlier, but with only a small addition. 1, 2, 3. We're going to use the responses API. We've got to create our model deployment. Here, we're passing in our instructions directly in line as opposed to as a variable. Same, not much of a difference. Whatever the user is asking, that's the same. Previous response, that's the same. But where we are now extending this is the collection of tools. So here we are bringing in web search at a known value. So we can use that same web search that we saw back in Foundry simply by saying web search. Very nice addition in here. And then we are passing in the file search with the vector ID store that we created up at the top here. There's our vector store, and then uploaded to vector store ID. So we are repeating that same vector store ID. This is a nice little array. We're passing an array of one item. From this point, we should be in pretty good shape. So we will remember to save. We will then open up the terminal at this point. This terminal has we've already activated the correct version of Python. As a quick reminder, as of this recording, the version of Python that these have all been tested against is 3.13. And now we should be able to do Python and tools. We'll let that get itself up and running. We can see here, Uploading the files, good start. We paused and let time pass a little bit. That took about a minute or so to upload those. And we will ask about what's going on in San Francisco next month. This should then use the web search to go ahead and grab that information. Right, and it came back with a pretty decent calendar of events that were all used by way of web search. And then we will do one more query here, one more prompt, where we will ask specifically, what hotels does Margie's Travel offer there? And if we take a look at the San Francisco brochure, we will see, in our case here, we've got a couple recommendations that we're going to be making: the Lombard Hotel and the Wharf Hotel. So those are coming specifically from our documents there. And if we take a look, life is good. We are getting both the Lombard Hotel and the Wharf Hotel from a recommendation from the documents that we uploaded. Right. So I think a really nice API that allows us to get a pretty simple chat application up and running without a lot of code. Right. Hope this has been good. Let's go wrap this up. All right. Let's see how much of this information you all held on to. First, which tool should you use when a model needs to answer questions from your own uploaded policy documents? Looking at the three options there. You probably said file search. In a function calling workflow, what should your application do after the model returns a function call item? And which statement about the code interpreter tool is correct? Excellent. What we've started with is an entry point into some of the basic tools that we're going to find in the Foundry collection. We're seeing how to call code, to search for files, to execute functions. We've seen the code interpreter tool, the web search tool, and the file search tool, and then a little bit of information about the ability to invoke custom functions. We're really just getting started here. I've been saying this for like 3 or 4 sections already, that we're just getting started, but we really are. So I hope that you will take this opportunity to continue to delve into the world of Foundry and into large language model use. If you want to learn more, you can take a look at the Microsoft Learn documentation that you're going to find at aka.ms/learn. Hope to see you in the next one.